analysis, working with Jessica and her team and streamlining exactly what we need in instructional materials really makes a difference. Meeting with our legislative folks, letting them hear our voice and kind of know they have so much on their plate when they get to Tallahassee that, you know, they're spinning and trying to figure out what everybody needs. So I think it's really important, as Jessica mentioned earlier, for you to really reach out to your folks, to the people that you are in your districts, and talk to them. So what we do in our Fatima organizations is a group of people, kind of cross-section amongst the state of Florida. We try to get a nice little districts, large districts to come together, and we go up to Tallahassee once or twice a year to meet with our legislative folks up there. And Jessica kind of sets up those meetings for us, and we meet with them, and we go around and talk to them, and we sit in on some sessions, and so they can really hear what we have to say about instructional materials. So I was asked to come up with 10 questions, and some of them might cross over a little bit from what Rob did, and how our panelists, they were given those questions ahead of time. And I want to thank Daniela for subbing. You know how we do in education, we're always good about subbing. Valentina could not be here after the fact, so Daniela stepped up. She is in Orange County, however, she is a Miami graduate, so we figured that was kind of close enough. And she has Valentina's responses, so Valentina answered all the questions. So she'll kind of share those from Valentina's point of view. I'm going to let everybody kind of get their water and get ready. Let me set up my timer. And you know, they always say the person that keeps you, between this session and lunch. So I am that person, so I'm going to try to make sure that we get out on time. Okay, I want to start with our first question. In your opinion, what is the most effective way for us to get our message across in Tallahassee? And so, Senator, I'd like to start with you. He has the background, definitely, for being there, so.
Well, a little, I guess, further background is that the entire time that I served in the legislative process, I was also still a school teacher. So I had that very interesting experience of seeing the impact of policy in my everyday work, and a lot of bad policy, so let me just be clear. And, the reason I say that is because I think the most effective means, answering question number one of this question, the most effective means of getting your message across Tallahassee is to do it early and often. You know, the idea of getting up in Tallahassee and meeting with legislators during session, although a valiant one, is one that is way behind the eight ball. Mm-hmm. Decisions, and I'm sure, you know, folks up here can attest to this, decisions in Tallahassee happen way prior to the start of session. You have bills that are moving, you have bills that are being filed. We just had an election last Tuesday. All those folks that are re-elected had already had bills being filed in the process already that are going to ultimately impact you. So anything you can do as Fatima members at the local level to meet with local elected officials, you know, county delegations are having their meetings now. Those are the kinds of things that need to happen so folks understand the importance of instructional materials. But one thing I want to emphasize, and definitely pass the mic after this, is you all need to be talking with one united voice. If federal members in different parts of the state are saying 67 different things, you're going to get one bad result. Let me say that again. If you're saying 67 different things, I can guarantee you will get one very bad result for the overall impact on instructional materials. So any sort of deliberate, concise ask that you want to go forward will be thing. And I wrote down one question that you should always be asking yourself is, how will this impact the most vulnerable student in my district? Is what I'm asking, you know, how for that student, for the student with severe ADHD, for the student who comes from a difficult socioeconomic background, how is this going to impact them?
Thank you. And Valentina makes 3 points. She says the one way that we can get our message across is to take the opportunities to go have face-to-face meetings in Tallahassee and ask the question, how can we best work together to achieve our mutual goals? To make sure to keep informed with the Fatima lobbyists on what we can do in providing recommendations on actions we can take both as individuals and as groups, and really to educate our teachers and our entire district staffs on how this process works so that we never forget that a student gets one chance at a good education and that we're all in this working together.
Just like Mr. Meyer, I have to be talking about different hats here. So I used to live in Palm Beach County until 2 weeks ago. I now live in Volusia County. I retired from instructional materials, as many of you know, so I'll try to let you know where I'm talking from. But to piggyback off what the senator said, this is really the perfect time. An election has just occurred. You have newly elected officials. From past experience, many of them know very little about what you do. And if you can have a conversation with them early on to inform them, because you'd be very surprised if you wait and you don't have that opportunity to speak with them, they might get misinformation. And if that's that first piece of information about instructional materials that they learn, they take that with them. So I can't encourage you enough, as the senator said, to do it often and as fast as you can to inform them of what Fatima's legislative information is that we want to give out. So.
Absolutely. Everyone really just hit the major point, which is early and often, and I would say in the district, that hopefully will make it easier for you because it's where you live, but they'll also tend to have more time when they get to Tallahassee and it's committee weeks and then it's session, they are in meetings, then they have constituents coming up as well. You tend to get very brief periods of time to meet with them in Tallahassee. So meeting in your home district, you might get more time. And just to add, the benefit of doing that before is because when they start getting bill language, they will reach out to you. If you're someone that they trust and they've had communication with and have built a relationship with, they'll ask you, hey, I got this bill that's coming up in committee and it's about instructional materials. Can you tell me, as your constituent, how this would impact you? That's much more effective than trying to go and testify in committee. Now, there's a place for that, and that's important as well, but decisions have usually already been made. Folks have already read the bill, they've kind of decided how they're gonna vote. Things do change sometimes in committee, but it's rare. More often than not, it's what happens before. So I would encourage you to do that. And then, think also as an association, what your position is. I know it's difficult because you're all obviously coming from different districts with different perspectives, but if you can have a common voice on some of these issues, that's helpful too. And then your local district can advocate if there happens to be a difference, that can be something that's done locally.
Okay, so I'm not going to pipe in too much on this panel, but I do just want to say, I want to piggyback on kind of what Kathy was talking about earlier, Dr. Nobles. Being the executive branch, we kind of do what we're told. But we do watch these changes very closely, and what I'm kind of hearing from these panelists right here, and from how I've already talked to you guys over the years, the focus being on student achievement is always something the DOE will get behind. So we love being able to hear that as you guys are talking about these things, where the focus is, and it's very encouraging.
Okay, thank you. And I think depending on when session falls, it's easier for us to get up there. Since session goes in March, we do try to go earlier. Now, it's tough when it goes in January because then we try to get in September or, August. And so it just depends. So you're exactly right. That is a message that Jessica gives us loud and clear. All right, our second question is, as you guys know, things have changed over the years with involvement as far as community and parents on the review of instructional materials at the district level. So many of us have had to change our policies at the district level to include this. So I'm asking the panelists, do you see instructional materials oversight continuing to change since new bills are introduced each year to involve parents and community in the selections of curricular materials?
It's okay, I'll start. Yes, It will continue to change. I think this is another area where you see the impact of term limits. There's even more pressure perhaps for folks that come in the legislature to make their mark, because there is an end period. Even if they serve all the terms that they can, they only get 8 years in the House and then 8 in the Senate. So absolutely. And then of course the legislature is very reactive to things that are happening throughout the state. So if there are things in your local community, and I heard that discussed on the last panel, then they will react to that if they hear from their constituents. But I think there's no doubt, given the changing landscape of education, the delivery methods of education, and just new folks entering the legislature every year, there is always going to be change. It'll probably ebb and flow, and we might see some years where you see more of an emphasis. But I think without a doubt, as the legislature has, in the last couple of years, we've seen a move perhaps where the minority party has picked up a few seats. When you get closer and closer together, those numbers get more even, then there's definitely more of a fight and discussion between the two parties. So that might be something that we can see on the horizon, but I think change is constant.
I will also answer with a yes. As somebody in the last panel had discussed, if you keep it your own within your county, if you keep things internal, so to speak, they don't hear it in Tallahassee. So if you continue to have an open process, because the community input is not going to go away. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's a bad thing that we have the community involved into our process. But if you continue to have an open process, you'll have less complications within your county with your instruction materials adoption process, because these changes are going to occur.
I think we agree that the changes will continue to occur, but we need to continue to work to protect the process itself, so that the review process takes place not only at our individual districts, but as the experts in our field, we keep the information and format so that our students get what they need to achieve their standards. And the information that's imparted upon them should not be just the representative of one point of view, but rather an overarching goal of instruction to prepare students to be knowledgeable, informed, and active citizens in an increasingly diverse community, nation, and independent world. So.
Well, this is where Fatima becomes that much more important. You all, look at the table of each other. You all are absolutely experts and should value yourselves as the experts as it pertains to instructional materials. I say this, having served in the legislature and seen how, the erosion of factual information being at the forefront of information and education has been a trend, an ongoing trend. And we see it play out every day when people are, spewing things that are, it's not even a question of it being disputable, it is, outright lies that are being told. And they're being told oftentimes through the instructional materials that are being adopted in other states, right? So my background is in social studies, and I remember as a teacher, both a teacher and a legislator, when states like Texas and Tennessee started adopting these books that referred to enslaved persons as unpaid workforce. Right? As crazy as that sounds, watching the eyes light up of some of my colleagues who are like, aha, that seems like a new thing, because we don't want to talk about the dark days of the past, and we want to make sure that we make these things as soft as possible, right? Or something as crazy as the evolution of plants, for fear that the evolution of plants would play into the whole notion of human evolution and thus create another problem. So now we can't talk about how flowers, a bee pollinating different flowers creates hybrid versions of fruit because of someone's fear that that's going to dovetail into a deeper discussion. And the thing about education is we can't be afraid to have a robust discussion, but we definitely can't allow for the erosion of facts. So for Fatima, as it pertains to all other organizations or groups that come from Tallahassee, you all have to own the space of being kind of the red line for any of the foolishness that some of these folks try to adopt in the process.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to skip 3 that kind of maybe was melded into 2. I'm going to go right to number 4. And this one states 67% of Florida teachers identified high-quality instructional materials as a funding priority, according to an online survey conducted by Scholastic. How can we ensure that these high-quality materials are available to our students and teachers? I don't know who wants to get started.
I'll jump on that. I'll jump on that just as it pertains to this most recent election. One of the troubling things that happened was the adoption of Amendment 5. For those of you who don't know, that now creates a position where the state legislature now has to have a supermajority in order to increase taxes. For those of you who view taxes as a dirty word, that's also the thing that pays for instructional materials. So when one cannot generate new revenue for additional instructional materials, it's going to have a direct impact on what you're able to do. And now here's the ugly truth about the Florida State Legislature as I viewed it. One of the many ugly truths, right? They wanted to push an agenda for technology and modernization without a funding source for the technology and modernization. So there's a falling on you all to now come up with new and creative and cheap ways to both find the product and the means of disseminating that product. So how do you, for 2.5 million students, how do you both keep the technology upgraded enough and keep the information current enough to satisfy all those in a space in which revenue is being continuously drained from the pool in which you're able to pull from? Now, the answer to that is you have to be more deliberate in your advocacy towards needing more resources to get this done. But we can't get into the business of playing the game that resources aren't available, or we can't create new resources, or we can't push to get more things. Otherwise, we end up like West Virginia or Arizona or some of these states that have a similar law in place in which you're standing on the steps of the front Capitol, donned in red, banging on the front door saying we have to do this because we're in a state of peril. And before we get to that point as Floridians, you all need to be proactive and I say you all, we all collectively, but we need you all to sort of beat that drum, the proverbial drum, to make sure you wake up folks to get as active as they need to be on supporting everything that we need across the educational diaspora, but especially in terms of the information that we provide our students.
I'm not following that. This also goes back to number 1 and the fact that it's part of Fatima's message. The sooner you can get this information out regarding the quality of content, how we receive the content, how we do the adoption process. I know not everybody likes to go to Tallahassee, not everybody has that legislative blood within them, but if you can take that message at your local level to just educate the people around you, educate your bosses, educate your local legislators so that they understand what your needs are, that is extremely helpful.
Yeah, I would say when we're looking at funding, and obviously when Faith shared earlier with your cost analysis and you saw the dramatic decrease that occurred as a result of the recession and the fact that we haven't really, gotten even close back to where we were, when you look at accounting for new students and inflation, we're even more in the hole, right? So when you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, as much as we all would love to think that the legislature will just give you that in 1 year, that's unlikely. So I think first, a strategy perhaps of some incremental growth. What do we think is a reasonable amount to ask for? Continue doing the cost analysis, continue showing what it should be, but then let's also maybe have a strategy of maybe $10 million. I don't know what the answer is, but something, an incremental change to get us to the goal. And then I think looking at a coalition of folks. So it's you guys, but teachers, who are dependent on these materials. There are parent advocacy groups who are concerned about the resources in their kids' classrooms and want to be sure that they have what they need to learn. Your charter school associations, because they get the student, the funding for their students, so they would certainly like to see an increase in funding. Publishers, there's a large group of folks, I think, that would benefit for getting additional funding. So I think perhaps looking at that coalition, looking at an incremental process, something that seems a little more likely and more achievable, is a good way to go. And keeping the focus, I think, as Kathy stated, on student achievement. That's why we want it. We don't just want it to buy stuff to have stuff. We want our kids to be successful, and the best way for kids to be successful is to have quality materials in the classroom.
No, and I'll just kind of pipe in at the state level as well. You know, as we're looking, you know, the second part of the question was how do we ensure that these high quality materials are available to students and teachers? At the state level, that's our focus, is quality materials. That's the whole point of the review process. As we talked again yesterday about the rating system, that we're actually not just looking at the standards are met, we're looking at how well they're met. So we're getting the best materials we possibly can. And part of being on the state adopted list is contracting with the state, ensuring we're getting it at the lowest cost possible. Publishers cannot offer these materials at any lower cost to any other state, any other district. So, you know, we may not be able to influence the funding from the legislator, but we're going to do whatever we can to make sure you guys are getting these good materials at a low cost.
And Valentina touched on the process and the timelines and making sure, or hoping that results from the state adoption process are available earlier for us in January, so that enables the school districts to review based on those titles that made the state cut and compare our results to that of the rest of the state. And then she also talked about the scope, that the state adoption process must include popular electives as well as the core courses and the subjects considered for adoptions. And she gives the example that in math and the current subject undergoing the adoption review, courses such as calculus and financial algebra have not been included in the review process. And these situations cost more work on the individual school districts, and so in order to help us provide higher quality materials, to add those as part of what goes through.
And I think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the call happens at the state according to the numbers?
Yes, we're looking at enrollment numbers across the district. So even though there may be pockets of higher enrollments for some of these more popular electives, we're kind of looking at it from the state perspective, and it is mostly based on enrollment.
Okay. Thank you. I know we've talked about the cost analysis being a very important document. It kind of just puts something in black and white that we want to support and say. So the next question is, the FATM organization meets each spring to develop the cost analysis document that reflects the instructional materials needed funding for the upcoming adoptions. Who needs to be included when we deliver this document to the legislative members? Of course, I think the senator probably can answer that best. But, or anybody else wants to jump in?
I would change the question and say, who shouldn't receive it? A lot of history and thought has gone into the cost analysis. As we have talked about before, this is a document that we spend hours creating. This is factual information using data provided by the state, taking the publisher information on pricing, and it's all put together. So this is a document that needs to be shared financially with everybody that has a voice, everybody that has an ear that will pay attention to it. As Dr. Harris went over the cost analysis this morning, and you saw from back in 2000 to 2018, that's information that many of you might have just learned today, and that's information that needs to be shared so that our legislators know exactly what the trend is when it comes to the financial impact. But I think everybody should know the cost analysis or receive it. And then I'll add to this, we are in a different age. We're in a digital age. And I learned from Senator Simmons a few years ago, we print one today We have a print copy in front of you. Will that change 3 months from now? And it will, because of enrollment. So the fact that we can send it digitally is even a greater asset because it's a more accurate document at the time that we send it out.
One of the things that you all could think about sharing too was some of the discussion that you had earlier about how you're filling the gaps right now. Because some of what you might get back is, well, you're down in all this money, but everybody has materials, right? What's the problem if they're not hearing about it from the local community? So you can say, you know, in my district, this is where we've had to take money from this area that could have been serving kids in this way, you know, making the case for it. Because if a problem doesn't bubble up, that enough folks are complaining about it, and if it seems like the district is getting by and somehow still managing, even though the resources have lessened, then it weakens the argument. So some examples, some concrete examples about what you're doing, I think would be really helpful when you develop the cost analysis. But I completely agree with Bill. You know, everyone that we can share it with. This would be another example of if you're willing to meet with your member, your senator, your representative in the local district, this would probably be a great thing to share at that time because it is complex. And then you might get a little more time to share some of the information and how you all build the cost analysis each year.
Fatima needs to be really consistent in joining other educational advocates in a larger coalition. So I would definitely, Superintendent's Association, School Boards Association, Teachers Union, PTA, PTSA, especially, grassroots advocacy groups that have had a growing influence in Tallahassee that pertains to education include Teach for America. They're going to be at the table. City Year, which I have the pleasure of being on the board of, which does after school work, can also be an additional ally in helping move things along as pertains to instructional material. So it's absolutely important that you get those out there. But in terms of legislative leadership, Tallahassee thinks many steps ahead. So what I mean by that is there is someone who's coming in who's an elected representative, who's likely a Republican, who's thinking about being speaker and will get the votes to be speaker 7 years from now. Right? So if you're putting together a cost analysis, projected cost analysis for future years, everyone in that step, everyone in that lineage, the guy or, the man or woman who is going to be the next Speaker of the House has already been decided, right? So the incoming speaker who'll be signed up is Jose Oliva, Representative Jose Oliva out of Miami. That's great, he's the speaker now. The person with the most influence is the person who's going to be the speaker next time. Right? And you have to understand that's how the political process works. A lot of people get caught up in titles like, oh, that's the sitting president. Their influence is the 2 years before they become the sitting president, or the 2 years before they become the speaker. So whoever's next in line for those things are the ones who wield the most influence and need to get copies of these documents in advance so that they can influence the process. More than likely, they'll be the appropriations shares in both chambers, and so that's important for them to have that as well because they're going to be the ones determining where the money goes anywhere.
Thank you. And that's why we have Jessica, because we have boots on the ground in Tallahassee, and she definitely listens and shares with us that information and lets us know what's going on in Tallahassee. So that's really important piece of her job, and she always kind of lets us know, as the senator said, who's coming up, who's in line, and what's going on there. So thank you. The next one is to talk about dual enrollment and advanced placement courses. Dual enrollment definitely has a funding source, separate, as we know, from FEFP, but a lot of times advanced placement, depending on the district, some districts, They use advanced placement funds. Some districts use instructional materials funds for those courses. So my question is, with the increasing numbers in dual enrollment and advanced placement courses, what can we anticipate for future increase in funding for these higher level courses? And also, how do we do that? You know, it's in the cost analysis, so how do we share that? Is it a separate document, or you know, how can we get our message across for those two areas?
Sorry, I served on education for various 8 years. I feel like I'm taking up all the space in the room. I apologize. And I wish Dr. Coleman Farrell was here, because that's the conversation that you need to have is with the state colleges. The issue in Tallahassee has been who shares the cost, or how's the cost distributed between state colleges and the school system as it pertains to dual enrollment. What they've done over the last 2 to 3 years is really lean on the Florida Virtual School to offer AP courses online, especially for those districts that don't have vast enrollment or vast dual enrollment or AP programs. But of course, that system is becoming overburdened. You're also seeing a drop in test scores for students that take online courses versus have the in-person AP courses. And so I think there's an opportunity there for Fatima, really, especially as it pertains to a coalition space, where you can now get with teachers who teach AP, talk about the notion of instructional materials, talk about the need for, you know, one-on-one, person-to-person instruction, but also keeping in mind what the state did in 2011, I believe it was, in which they shifted the enrollment numbers for AP courses to make them starkly different than core courses, right? So the argument that they made, and foolishly, in my opinion, is that they said that those AP courses could now take on numbers in excess of 40 students per class. So if you, for large school districts, you're talking about 45, 46 students in an AP English course or an AP economics course, because and their argument was that these students are so high performing that they're okay with larger class sizes. Even though the argument at the college level is that those same courses have to maintain smaller enrollment numbers. So it's a very sort of weird paradigm that you have there, where once they get to college and take English, their classes are capped at 19. If they take college English in high school, their classes can be above 40. I don't know how that makes sense, but again, this is why it's important for you all to build these coalition spaces, to have these discussions, because for a teacher now teaching 45 students in AP, they're going to need additional support, additional materials, additional outside resources and materials in order to truly function and be productive.
I think Valentina just echoes the thoughts that there's just not enough funding, that it would need to increase based on the enrollments as we move up and more schools are pushing students to be able to take these classes, you know, at the high school level, whether it's dual enrollment funding or the AP